Hello.
Hi, it's Jonathan.
Howdy.
Ben,
Yes.
this is Hal. How's it going?
Good. I had a last minute panic, but I think we're good.
Okay.
I got to like 12 minutes ago, and I was like, wait a second, this is on Skype. I need a USB microphone, and I don't have one.
Oh, gosh.
So I just ran and raided our supply closet.
What
So I have a nice, shiny new USB microphone.
Yeah, you found one with good sound. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
This was unboxed 3 minutes ago.
Do you have video you can send us?
Do I have? I have a webcam, but it's all messed up.
Okay.
What happens when you turn it on?
I can put your Skype picture on there.
I can. Well, it's all messed up too. If I turn on my webcam, I've just turned it on. You're gonna see that like I've got some sort of weird effect going on.
That'll work.
I want to see it.
It should be on now. I don't know if you can see it yet.
Yeah, I can see it. But
Yeah,
I need to capture it so that I can...
it's very strange. It's like there's some weird film over the camera or something. I don't know.
Tape residue.
It's very funky. Or you can get like, I'll try and clean it and you'll see. No, I think something's just busted with the webcam on this. If you want a picture of me, you can just go to my Twitter account.
Yeah, we do have one that I put on the podcast blog.
Excellent.
It's
As long as it's not an 8-year-old photo of me from when I used to have long hair.
I can confirm it is a recent picture.
When I started working on Hyper-V like 10 years ago, I used to have shoulder-length hair. And
Really?
These days, it's all crew cut. And every now and then, I get a new employee who finds an old photo of me with shoulder-length hair, and they kind of freak out.
Nice. What's our episode number, Jonathan?
304.
Oh, cool.
My window capture is not working correctly, so I'm trying to redo it.
You don't want this video of me anyway.
I want to see it. I want to see how it's messed up. I don't... Jonathan, share it.
I will as soon as I can. I'm trying. Trust me.
I've never seen this before. It is very strange.
I am excited about the topic tonight, Ben. I'm not sure if you could tell.
Yeah, I got a little hint of that. Now I'm looking forward to it. Should be fun to chat.
I was slated to go to Ignite, and I had to cancel. So
yes,
there was a lot of build confused and then unconfused by this very topic here shortly.
Well, I'm not sure if I can promise the unconfused. I can definitely bring the confused. It's my goal to confuse you as much as possible.
Awesome. Good enough.
Can somebody in the chat room verify that the video came back after I did that?
I see video.
Okay.
I mean, I did see it interrupted as well, but I think we're good.
If I can get this thing to work. Come on.
Stewie says in chat room, Hal looks great, all black screen. Yeah, see, I'm wearing my black t-shirt, of course. Actually, I've got my Windows Azure shirt on today.
Excellent.
Yes,
So
I
the
wore it
problem
for
is,
this occasion.
Nobody can see it.
Do you have a hard stop, by the way? I know that we had to change the time.
No, I do not. I appreciate changing the time.
Quite all right.
No, the usual time falls directly when my children have dinner. So
yes.
It would have been awkward. So I don't have a hard stop. I do have children who will want me to stop talking to strange people on the internet and go have dinner with them eventually.
How old are your kids?
13, 11, and 6.
Awesome.
We run
I have
the
some in
gamut.
that range as well. So what? Well, like I want to start. I'm ready, Jonathan. I'm waiting on you, man. No pressure.
I understand that.
See, I'm not good at like actual small talk. The small talk that I'm capable of doing and that I enjoy is, geeking out. It's shop talk basically.
Exactly. No, I know the problem. I have exactly the same thing.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of
As I
something that we could talk about that's actually not related to the topic of the show so that we don't spoil it.
Mr. Robot?
Yes. Have you seen Mr. Robot?
No, I haven't seen Mr. Robot. See, this is my problem too. I tell people all the time, outside of work, I'm incredibly boring.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I watch I watch no TV, generally speaking. But there's a couple shows that now and again somebody will say, hey, you need to check this one out. And one of them recently was Mr. Robot. It's got Christian Slater in it, and I don't think there's any other known stars, but it's good. It's a hacker show, IT security focus kind of stuff, and it is nothing like NCIS or some others in the past vein that have been have elements of IT security that have been just really painful to watch. So
I can see myself.
Yes, that doesn't look too bad. It looks.
What's that sample?
I don't know.
That is my air conditioner evacuating water to the outside of the house noisily.
Oh yeah, the condensate pump.
Yes.
This is actually quite unnerving because I've got the website up and I've got my webcam and there's lag.
Oh yeah, it's best not to look at.
Don't
and make sure
look
that you
directly in the sun.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow, why does it not want to
You did-
capture that window?
You did mute the widget, right?
Yeah.
Ben?
Yes.
Hal, I'm going to call you back
All right.
in just a second.
Better. Okay. Hey.
Okay. I'm going to try this again. Does not want to capture your video.
It wants to capture my video, which is just terrible. It's choosing the wrong video to capture.
Apparently.
Ah, finally. Now we're getting somewhere.
Are we?
Believe it or not, we are.
All right. Are you going to
Well, I'm kind of-
label Ben?
Trust me, man. I do this often.
Weekly.
I do it strongly.
Good answer.
Okay. We now have video. And God willing, it's streaming.
Hey, there we go. All right. 3 at one time.
I've actually paused the stream because I can't. I'm getting distracted by me out of sync.
That's fine. We all know that it's. Oh, that's a pretty. Yeah, I think I'm keeping that one. Hold on, I'll show you. I took a shot of the stream, like I do for the Facebook page, basically. Just a second, I will share it with the group. There it is. And there that is. Okay, cool. Do you happen to be in the chat room, Ben?
Yes, I am.
Excellent.
Actually, I'm going to move my laptop so I'm not as backlit as I currently am. So I wasn't expecting to use the video, so I positioned the laptop with the sun directly behind me. So she'll change that. Have more natural lighting.
Okay.
No, I'm just trying to
Are
get
we?
Ben's. Ah, there we go. Finally. No, I just need to change the size.
You say so.
This is the world of modern communication. The first 5 minutes is always spent trying to get the computers to work.
Yeah. And there's always, two people that are late. Well, wait, is he going by Benjamin now?
That's
Yeah.
what it says in Skype.
It says, okay, well, make the call, Ben.
Either works. Either's fine.
Okay.
Usually I go by Ben, but my name actually is Benjamin. And I wasn't actually named Virtual PC Guy at birth.
Really?
It's a little known fact.
That's news. I did not know that.
Lack of foresight from my parents.
I'm sure they did other things, right?
Yeah. Well, they introduced me to computers, so maybe, well, yeah.
There you go. We'll talk about that at the end of the show. Because it's your second time here, I believe.
Yes, it is.
We do, yes. All right. Ready to go, Jonathan?
Yes, we are live, recording, streaming, have video. Everybody has a name under their video. All is right with the world.
All right. Then I am going to start it off then. I shared the show notes with you, Jonathan, in case you would like to see them.
Thank you.
Tonight on the PowerScripting podcast, we are pleased to have with us back for a second time, Ben Armstrong from Microsoft. Hello, Ben.
Hello.
How are you today? Looks sunny.
I'm good. It is a surprisingly lovely day in Seattle. It's one of the 6 weeks where we get sun and not rain, and everyone's enjoying it.
Yes, and you're inside.
I am inside.
Thank you very much. So, welcome back. Second time you're on the show, but there probably are some people that didn't hear the first episode. We'll have to look up the episode number for people so that we can have you go check that out. But for people who don't know who you are, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Ben Armstrong. I'm I should do my fancy title. My fancy title is I am Principal Program Manager Lead on Hyper-V. So working on Hyper-V virtual machines and recently Windows Server containers. And the
Awesome.
previous episode was episode 226. Look at that.
You're on the ball, man. You can read from the chat room and
I can
talk.
read from the chat room. I'm also I'm not illiterate.
Well, no, I mean we discussed this on the podcast before, where it can be challenging to have a verbal discussion with somebody while at the same time trying to pay attention to what's going on in the chat room.
It's
I mean,
okay.
it is
I'm
a skill.
borderline ADD, so I enjoy having things distract me that are actually semi on topic.
Awesome, you're in good company. So, you've been doing things with Hyper-V for how long now?
Forever.
In virtualization. Forever.
Is the short answer. So I've been virtualization. I've been working in virtualization for 15 years now, which in the world of IT is an eternity. And I've been working on Hyper-V since there was a Hyper-V. I was part of the team that started building the first version of Hyper-V, and still here and having fun.
So, so if we have a tough question about Hyper-V, maybe you could find somebody that knows something about it, maybe in the hallway or in the next office or something.
Flag somebody down.
It is one of the things I like to. I've got used to introducing myself this way. I say, I've been working on Hyper-V forever. The good thing about this is if you have a strange question about Hyper-V, I probably know the answer. The bad thing is if there's something you don't like about Hyper-V, it's probably my fault.
Fair enough. So, how big is the team of, whether it's PMs and developers and other types of engineers that work on Hyper-V generally? So
this is actually a really hard question for me to answer. And it's a hard question to answer for two reasons. The first reason is I've actually been told by my lawyers that I'm never allowed to give an explicit answer to that question.
Really?
Apparently it's like a business secret thing that we're not allowed to talk about how many people we have working on different things.
Interesting.
That's funny.
So the answer to that question is X, where X is a variable. But at a higher level, though, it's kind of a hard question to answer because one of the core concepts of Hyper-V, when we started working on Hyper-V, we actually sat down and went, we want to build a virtualization platform that is intrinsically integrated into Windows. And so there's a lot of people who work on Hyper-V but don't work on Hyper-V. So we have the Windows Server clustering team. They don't work on Hyper-V, but they do a lot of great stuff for Hyper-V. We have the Windows networking team. We have the storage team. We have the file server team. We have there's so many different teams where technically they don't work on Hyper-V, but they end up contributing a huge amount of features and functionality to Hyper-V.
Makes sense. So
I've had
Go
program managers on other teams complain that they do more for Hyper-V than for their own featers.
Well, I think that's probably
and by the way,
case
Steven's onto the secret. It is just me. I'm the only person working on Hyper-V. It's all a shadow game. Now, I can confirm that there is more than one person working on Hyper-V. I think I can safely say that.
So I wanted to have you on the show for a few reasons, and one of the big one is containers, and I want to get to that in a moment, but I want to work through a few things first here. So last week we had Andrew Mason on the show, and he did a great job of teaching us about what you guys are doing with Nano Server, which I think is an awesome product, and it's new. That this is one of those years for Microsoft that there's really a lot of new stuff coming out, and it's pretty exciting. If you're in this space, right, with us. So, what I want to be sure that by the end of this, that we are hopefully less confused. When we talked about this might be a challenge, but we now have a new server platform. It's still Windows, but it's different. It's not Windows. It's not called Windows. This Nano thing, and then containers are a whole other thing. It's not actually virtualization, but I'm sure there's aspects of it that are similar, maybe under the covers. I don't know. I want to look to you for things like some of the way that things are built.
Yeah,
so,
and it is. I will say it is really exciting times. I've been chatting to a number of the people around here and saying, when I look at what we're doing in Windows Server 2016, for the first time in about 5-6 years, I really feel like I'm going out and chatting to customers again and saying okay, let me explain to you how everything's going to be very different in a couple of years' time. Because when you look at Nano Server and you look at containers and you look at where things are going, the data centers in 3-4 years' time are going to be very different to what they look like today.
Yeah, it's going to be different. So let's start from the beginning, because I want to make sure that people understand what a container is and why I'm excited about it. So why don't you level set for everybody?
So I'm probably gonna end up having to take a couple of passes at this because it is super confusing for everyone. And I will just say we are madly and furiously working on trying to get the first build out for the public to play with, because it is one of those technologies where it's once you get your hands on this and play with it, it is very cool, and you start to see where all the potential comes in. So, as I said, I'm going to take a couple of passes. Let me try and give you the computer science answer first, because I'm a nerd and I like to give the computer science answer, and then we'll talk about some of the hands-on implications.
Okay.
So, if we go back to computer science, you can actually look at operating systems and operating system design and say, we have this large toolbox of things that allow you to isolate workloads. And there are different tools in this toolbox that come with different trade-offs. So 2 examples that people are very familiar with. One example is virtual machines. They're great. They're a huge level of isolation. You have complete protection and safety. They're also very heavyweight. They use a lot of resource. They come with a lot of baggage. If you go all the way to the other end of the spectrum, and I chuckle at this because people forget that this is actually a thing of isolation. We have applications, and if you go back in the Wayback Machine, we had one of the big
He just dropped.
No! Come back to us, Ben. We're not letting you go.
There's a problem with the internet connection between you two. Please wait. Ben?
Must be Microsoft
Are you
Office
back?
because, you and me are on.
Yeah.
We're streaming. Oh, that is an interesting picture. Yeah, it looks like there's cellophane.
Yeah, it's
over
like
the
through a
front.
shower door or something.
Yeah, that's a better. Yep.
Hello.
Ben, are you back with us?
Hello.
Yeah, of course it had to drop off there.
Okay, so you were talking about applications as a layer
Yes.
of virtualization.
Way back in the day, we used to have DOS, which could only run a single application at a time. And the big advent of multi-processing operating systems was, hey, I can now run multiple applications and they're isolated from each other. So that's kind of the other end of the spectrum, where it's really lightweight, it's really easy, but you have a very low level of isolation, as it were. So containers then fit somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. They have some of the aspects of virtual machines and some of the aspects of processes.
So is it more like in Windows where you have user mode and kernel mode, memory, and things like that?
So it's really interesting to start digging into and understanding. So let's talk about some of the places where containers are like a process versus some of the places where they're like a virtual machine. So some of the places where containers are like a virtual machine, each container has its own IP address and its own identity on the network. So you start a container, and much like a virtual machine, it gets its own IP address, has its own MAC address, all that goodness. However, like a process, these things start and stop pretty darn instantly. And that's actually really interesting. It also only uses the memory that is needed for the processes that you're running in the container. So it uses a lot less memory than a virtual machine. Now, the trade-off there is then to get all of this goodness, you can only run the same operating system in a container that you're running on. So you can run multiple instances of Windows Server 2016, and they're really fast to start, and they're small and light, but they have their own system identity.
So is this at all like the app virtualization stuff, where the app is kind of running in a sandbox and it has like a virtual registry that it writes to and can even have like a virtual file system paths and things like that?
And we've actually done a number of presentations on this where we talk about how app virtualization is another kind of step on the spectrum of different isolation tools.
Okay.
Containers are a little bit lower down than app virtualization, because with app virtualization, they do get their own registry and file system, but they don't have their own system identity.
Right,
So
they don't have
every
an IP
application-
address.
Yeah. Whereas with containers, they have their own IP address. So it's really, and I mean, the big thing to understand about the container technology is just the impact of how quick it is to provision them and start them and throw them away.
So at what point are you considering using containers as opposed to virtual machines?
This and that right there, that is the $64 million question. And I have been infuriating everyone by saying we really don't know. Because we don't really know. And one of the reasons why we're really keen to get containers out there is to let people play with them and see what's working, what works and what doesn't work. So let me fill in some of the conversations we've had and some of the details we know. So one of the scenarios that we know containers are going to be really popular for is for people doing continuous development and integration. The great thing about a container is you can create it in a couple of seconds, run an app, throw it away. So if you're doing live site development, if you're doing stuff, cycles where you're creating and throwing away and so on, containers are going to be a lot better fit than virtual machines. However, there are then two interesting wrinkles that come up. The first thing is we actually expect most people to run containers in virtual machines. So we expect that a lot of people are going to continue to use their existing virtual machine infrastructure and then use containers to get kind of a higher level of agility and compactness on top of that. But then there's a third conversation. So I've had this chat a number of times with people who are old school infrastructure guys, and they're using virtual machines happily today. And I talk about what containers are and how they work, and talk about hey, this is great for continuous development. And they get to the end and they say, yeah, I get all this, but I think I'll probably stick with virtual machines. And my response to them on that is, I actually run a sizable virtual machine infrastructure in my house. And I've looked at my virtual machine infrastructure, and I have an entire virtual machine just running an SMTP relay. That's 40 gig of hard drive, a gig of RAM. I patch it, I update it, and it's just running honestly a process that needs a MIC.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that. I mean, I was just thinking the example that came to me was a PowerShell DSC pull server. That thing uses minuscule resources. It's basically just, a little bit of IIS serving up some MOF files. And, a whole virtual machine or more than one for redundancy is dedicated to that. And I would think that would be much more suited to a container because you really only need a little bit of resources in order to make that happen. But you do want it to have its own IP address, its own identity. So yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah. So and this is where we're going to be really interested to see what workloads people are running and what they do inside of containers.
So are you basically able to run any application in a container that would run on the same version of the operating system that outside of a container, assuming it doesn't need to talk to hardware?
So that is the goal. Keep in mind we're in the middle of developing this, so we got bugs right now. And this is one of the things we're tracking as we're trying to figure out how good can we get it before we get the first release out. So we have a bunch of different stuff running in containers right now. We have ASP workloads, we have IIS running. My favorite one is I actually have Minecraft server running inside a Windows container. So that's really cool. I actually love giving that demo because I think it highlights the power of containers, because I can go from absolutely nothing to a fully provisioned new Minecraft server with its own IP address, with a new world, everything ready to go in 25 seconds.
Wow. So are containers dynamic or are they static? I mean, do you set up a container and says, it can have this much processor and this much RAM and this much hard drive? Or do you just spin it up and there's some process that dynamically kind of manages your containers and adjusts them as needed? I mean, how does that work?
So the containers are going to be a lot more dynamic than virtual machines. We are going to provide people with the ability to set limits But the default mode is going to be that it's going to be more process-like in the dynamic nature of how the resources work.
Now, is there some kind of container management layer?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Okay.
so we're, and I mean, to keep in mind, this is all technology that's being rapidly developed right now. We're actually aiming for our first beta release to deliver 2 management experiences for containers. The first one is we're going to have an inbox native PowerShell experience where you can go through, create containers, manage containers, do all the goodness. We're actually doing some cool work around allowing you to do native PowerShell remoting directly into containers. So that's all going to be really cool. The other thing that we're doing, though, is we're working very closely with the guys at Docker to provide full support for the Docker management story so that people who are familiar with that are going to be able to use that with Windows containers as well.
So since you said Docker, we'll have to go into that, and I had planned on bringing it up, but before we do, I want to go to a question in the chat room that I think it turns into some. Well, here, I'll just pitch it. It's really simple. Is a container a VM? Now, at first glance, I wanted to not say the question that way, but then I realized, okay, wait a second. What is hosting a container? So
I've seen a bunch of questions about this. So there's multiple ways to answer this. And this is where it's like, I'm sorry, I'm going to make it more confusing before I make it better.
Okay.
So there are a lot of aspects of containers that look and feel like virtual machines.
Okay.
They have their own system identity. You start and stop them, and so on. So from just a code efficiency point of view, we are leveraging a bunch of the Hyper-V management infrastructure to allow you to manage containers. So for people who are deep Hyper-V nerds, we have the VMMS in Hyper-V, which exposes our WMI interface that we build our PowerShell on top of. We've extended the VMMS to do our container management as well. So people who are used to programming against Hyper-V are going to be very familiar with how you program against containers. From a where do they run? Because I saw some questions about like, so wait, can you run these on physical servers? Can you run them in virtual machines? So on. So we're absolutely going to support running containers on bare metal. For people who want to do that, you're going to be able to install Windows Server on physical hardware and use it just to run containers. We are expecting, however, that most people are going to run them inside virtual machines. So one of the things that we're actually doing is, for the first time ever, we're doing a lot of work on making sure that all the Hyper-V management infrastructure can run just fine inside of a virtual machine so that you can run containers inside of virtual machines. The one thing that we're missing here, and we've been arguing about this a lot, is if you put Windows on hardware and you create a virtual machine and you then run containers in that virtual machine, what do the words host and guest mean anymore?
Yeah, that's a good point. But
so we've had some terrible names suggested. So far, the depending on who you talk to, there's the host, the container host, and the guest. There's the guest, the host, and the hosty host. Or my personal favorite, the guest, the host, and the mezzanine.
Oh, I mean, I kind of like it, but I don't think it's going to stick. I don't see it.
I think you should call the container host IKEA.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of bad names being suggested.
So now you can run many containers from the host. I'm just going to say host generically here. Are there going to be numbers that you're going to be sharing at some point that kind of express how many containers in a way that you would understand if you're comparing them to virtual machines, like how many containers you can host on a virtual machine, on a single system, that kind of thing? I don't know how you measure these things.
So I wish I could share numbers right now, and I'm sorely tempted to share numbers right now. However, my dev team would get very mad at me if I did. We are right in the middle of a big performance tuning effort to try and get these numbers as good as possible before we ship. Realistically, we expect containers to use substantially less memory than virtual machines and substantially less storage space. On the memory side, we're expecting that a container, like if you spin up a copy of Windows in a container, it should be using somewhere in the ballpark of 100 meg of memory or less, as opposed to with a virtual machine where it's using a gig.
Nice.
So we're expecting factors more workload that you can run.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about more about the isolation. And you mentioned network, for example. Each container has its own personality and it has a IP address. So you have network isolation. What about process table, memory, file system? Any specifics you can go into there?
So for this is where I have to be really careful, because when we get into this conversation, the phrase we like to use here is you don't want to break yourself into jail, and that if you're not careful, you end up talking about things being insecure when they're not and secure when they're not. So from an isolation point of view, the container is fully isolated from the rest of the world. So if you go into a container, if you mess around with its file system, with its registry, that all gets contained. If you do a process list inside the container, you only see the processes that are inside that container. And it only has access to those processes. Now, right now, the interesting thing is if you go into the host and you bring up Task Manager, the host can actually see all the processes in all the containers. But the containers can't see each other and they can't see out. So it is actually kind of interesting, because you can, if you go into the host, the Task Manager starts to look really strange, because there's a bunch of stuff that you would normally only expect to see one of in a system, and all of a sudden now you're seeing 10 of them. So like you'll see, 10 copies of LSASS, which is the security engine, and so on.
What was that sound you just made, John?
So that was a shiver of horror.
Yeah, but each container only sees its own processes in its own space.
Yeah, so just kill LSASS, no big deal.
Don't do that.
All right, so let me see if I can catch up with some of the questions here. I wanted to ask, you said that the container is going to be the same operating system as the host. Is that okay? So, all right. Well, this is the part where I'm going to talk about Docker. So, the white elephant in the or pink elephant. What is that phrase? Anyway, the elephant in the room is that Microsoft is not first to this concept of containers, of course. And you mentioned Docker already, and there's some other technologies related to that. And if you think about concepts, this has been done, in big iron, days, long ago and many moons ago, or years or decades. And so the way that Docker works is that you have a shared Linux kernel, and then on top of that, the operating system it's still Linux, but technically have to be the same kind of Linux, same distribution of Linux. So you can have a situation where you would run a different, you could have, Red Hat in one and Ubuntu in another, or whatever. Is there a similar concept at all here where you would have, the same version of, Server 2016 or what have you, but maybe one would be SP, or RTM and the other would be SP2?
So a whole bunch of questions and concepts there to talk about. So let me tackle the last one first. and then we'll start, unraveling and working back. So the reality of containers, and another computer science moment. If you think about virtual machines, the API between the virtualization layer and what's running inside the object of isolation. For virtual machines, that API is the x86 CPU instruction set. So anything that can run on x86, great. For containers, that API is the kernel user mode boundary. Now, what this means is, like, if you look at Linux and if you look at Linux containers, you can't be running different kernel versions. You can't have kernel patches applied to one container and not to another. And it's going to be the same story with Windows containers. So you can't update kernel mode components in one container but not in another. Now, there is actually, an interesting conversation to have around, like, hey, what about, if I want to run, a server core container on Nano Server or stuff like that, where, hey, that's the same kernel. Right now, we believe that should be possible. However, our first goal is to just get containers out there. So it's highly likely that in our first release, we're just going to be saying, you know what, same version of Windows on same version of Windows, just from a getting things ready to ship point of view.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Will you be able to cluster containers?
So this is
not going to stop, by the way, until you run.
It's completely fine.
Or clone them. Like, can I install an application in a container and then clone 20 of them and then cluster it?
So there's a lot of questions that we have here. So first, can you clone containers? Absolutely. That's actually one of the great things about containers is the file system is quite different to virtual machines in that we're not projecting a block device like a virtual hard drive. We're actually projecting a file system, which means that each container only contains the changes that you make to that container. So these things are actually not just small in memory, but they're small on disk as well.
Okay.
Now, on the can you cluster them question, there's a whole bunch of infrastructure that we have around virtual machines right now, like clustering and backup and live migration and on and on and on, where right now we genuinely don't know what's going to make sense in containers and what isn't. And there are really two things that kind of, make us go question, like, what's going to make sense here? So for instance, if you think about clustering, I can cluster a virtual machine, and if I have a hardware failure, we'll detect that about 30 seconds later, and we'll start the virtual machine up on another node. Well, as I said earlier, I can build a Minecraft server container from scratch in 25 seconds.
Right.
So, would I
why
really
bother?
want to? Why cluster that? So there's a bunch of things, and the other thing to highlight is, as I've been saying, we actually expect people to run these in virtual machines a lot. So,
okay, can I stop you there? Why do you expect that?
Why do we expect that?
So why do you expect that?
Why do I expect that? I want to talk about this because this is really interesting because you kind of touched on this in the Docker discussion and the Linux discussion. So So we've had various investigations into container technologies and different approaches for ages now. One of the reasons why we're able to jump on this so quickly is because we had a lot of the code sitting around in pieces and so on, and it's like, okay, let's put this together and productize it. And one of the interesting things for me when Docker was first coming out was we were kind of scratching our head and going like, why is this taking off? Because we'd actually looked at container technology, and we'd gone out and talked to people, and no one had ever been really interested in it. Because we'd gone out and we'd talked to people and said, hey, we can create this thing, and it's got all these nice properties of a container, but it can only run the operating system you're running on. And when we got to that line, people would say, oh, no, give us virtual machines. I need to run different operating systems. And so we'd been working on virtual machines and not working heavily on containers. So then Docker comes out and it's gaining popularity. And there was actually a period in time where on their website, they've stopped saying this, by the way, now, but they had for a while, they had on their website, Docker, write once, run anywhere. And when I first saw that, I was like, that is a load of crap. It's not write once, run anywhere. It's write once, run anywhere there's a Linux 3.8 kernel. Like, why aren't people calling them on this? And after a day or two of, shaking my fist at my computer screen, I had a realization. And the realization was, thanks to the prevalence of virtualization, you can run a Linux 3.8 kernel anywhere. So if you want to run a Linux container on your Mac, fine, stick it in a virtual machine. You want to run it on Amazon, you want to run it on Azure, you want to run it on your Windows Server, you want to run it wherever you want to run it, you can. And looking at how people are using Linux containers today, we've actually found that the vast majority of Linux containers are running inside virtual machines. And so that's why we look at this and go like, our expectation is that most Windows containers are going to run inside virtual machines as well. Now, whether those are virtual machines that are running in public clouds like Azure and Amazon, whether they're virtual machines running in private clouds, or whether they're virtual machines running on people's laptops, our expectation is that's probably going to be where we see a lot of these running, because that's what we see today in Linux containers.
Okay, so I guess I can accept that, that you see it happen right now in Docker. So let's talk a little bit more about Docker. No, I don't want to go there yet. So tell me. Okay, so Windows. I'm sorry, I keep saying Windows. Nano Server. What is the relationship with it to containers? Are there features that are going to be different on it versus Windows Server? Are there any differences there?
So let me give a bit of let's do a sidetrack and do let me give a sales pitch and a bit of excitement for Nano Server.
Okay.
I am so happy to see Nano Server coming out. So Nano Server is actually originally something that we developed for Azure for running Hyper-V on. This is where I get to make everyone who's listening to this podcast jealous. So we got Hyper-V running on Nano Server while we were developing Windows Server 2012 R2. And it is just the best Hyper-V host in the world. So I actually have a 4-node Nano Server Hyper-V cluster running in my house. And each of those guys, the host OS is 500 meg on disk. And all it is just what you need to run Hyper-V and nothing else. And I can redeploy it in seconds. And it's just gorgeous, and once you get it up and running, it is so powerful. So I'm really excited to see that we're finally getting this out so the rest of the world can play with it. Now, the key thing to understand about Nano is what we've done with Nano Server is really two things. The first thing we've done is we've gone through and removed everything that you don't need on a server. And there is so much stuff on full fat Windows Server today that you just don't need on a server. The second thing, though, and this is kind of the more important thing, is we've gone through and we've cleaned house on the Windows 32 API. So the Windows 32 API is quite old and well established these days. But the result is there's a whole lot of infrastructure in there where we're really providing 6 APIs that do the same thing. And what we've done with Nano Server is we've gone through, looked at the 6 APIs and said, you know what? Like, this one of the 6 is the best one. It provides the most functionality, it's the most secure, whatever. And we'll keep that one and we'll get rid of the other 6. So the result is...
So this is where you come into the shims that Andrew Mason was talking about last week.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but the result is Nano Server ends up being much lower footprint, much lower servicing impact, much higher performance. It's just goodness all around. And to give some context, so I'm sure Andrew mentioned this, like we've been, running Nano Server internally. The need to reboot a Nano Server for a patch over the last 24 months, I believe you've had to do it 3 times.
Wow.
That's amazing.
So, now the great thing about, like, the first to highlight, you can, like, there's actually a lot that you can run in Nano Server. So, like, we have a bunch of our own infrastructure running in Nano Server. We've also been doing a bunch of work to get, I know we did a demo recently where we showed Node.js running inside of Nano Server. Now, we've announced that when we put the first release of Windows containers out, we're basically going to be supporting 2 runtimes. We're going to allow you to run Windows Server Core, which is going to be the full Windows Server, with full Win32 API, so on. But we're also going to be supporting Nano Server, and that's going to give you just really, really low memory footprint, really fast start. That's where we're expecting to see the best performance and the best bang for the buck out of containers.
So if you are running containers on Nano Server on hardware, you're going to be able to have ridiculous amounts of workload on that thing, is what it sounds like.
Absolutely.
So must the containers running on a Nano Server be Nano Server containers?
In the first release.
And that's okay. That's what we were talking about a little bit earlier, where
this is
potentially.
We've done the architectural diagram, and we think it should be possible in the future to allow you to make these, but in the first release, we're just focusing Nano on Nano, Core on Core.
Okay. All right. I think I got it. So, okay.
Is there
I'm
anything?
taking these things off on my fingers.
Is it going to be different to? Are people going to write applications differently as a result of container technology on Windows specifically?
Absolutely. That's actually one of the things I'm most excited about. And I've been chatting to a number of developers about this. What becomes really interesting now is, when you start thinking about a world where you can spin up a new isolated container in, under seconds kind of thing. First, there's one of the things I've been pointing out to architects is if you're building a system and you see the words scale out proxy anywhere, then you should be using containers. But second, I think there's going to be a lot of potential for people to design new architectures once they go oh, actually, I can very quickly and easily spin these things up.
Well, you see people do things like, my old school application has a web server and it has a database server. Maybe it's some proprietary database, or maybe it's SQL, and it has a couple different pieces and parts to it. Will people break those up into containers? So IIS is running in a container and the database is running in a container, that sort of thing?
Absolutely. And but at the same time, just to be clear, we're waiting to see what people do. We think all of these things are possible, but it's going to be interesting to see what people do. There's one thing I want to talk about. We've kind of danced around this a bit, and that is the work that we've been doing to integrate with Docker.
So I'll tee it up for you because I did want to get to this, and I didn't want to dodge it, but I wanted to make sure that conceptually, basically, that I didn't have any conceptual questions coming from the chat room before we shifted, and I think we are at a good point. So it's good. Somebody says, "You think you have server sprawl now? Just wait till containers."
By the way, you think you have server sprawl? Do you want to know the first thing that happens when you start playing with containers? You melt every DHCP server you have.
Nice. I can see that.
The amount of damage we have caused to network infrastructure, I have actually had to change my DHCP server in my house so that now DHCP lease time in my house is 1 hour.
Oh my gosh.
Because
That's
otherwise
funny.
I was like
I'm out of IPs again.
Well, like we've now learned this on the team. It's like as soon as we get anyone contact us and be like, "So I was debugging this issue, and all of a sudden networking stopped working." And it's like, "You were debugging an issue," and they're like, "Yeah." It's like, "So you were starting and stopping containers a lot, right?" And they're like, "Yeah, like every second." I was like, "Right." you just claimed every IP address.
Nice.
Time for IPv6.
Yes. But anyway.
So, let's go to Docker. I wanted to, and DockerCon was this week. People that might be listening to the podcast now or hearing it soon, they'll know that there were lots of announcements made, and including a lot of participation from Microsoft. Some of which was teased months ago. And some of this is new. So why don't you tell us about the story between Microsoft and Docker?
So the before I get to the story, which is a fun story in and of itself, one of the things that I have to highlight is when a lot of people think about Docker, they think, "Oh yeah, those are the container guys." Which is interesting because Docker themselves don't think of themselves as the container guys. If you actually go to the Docker website and read about what is Docker, they will talk about how they're a great platform for packaging and distribution of applications. And that's what they really see themselves as, is they see themselves as a fantastic platform for, taking your package and getting it so that you can move it between different clouds and different environments and run it repeatedly and reliably. Now, they started on Linux using the Linux container technology. But for them, that's really a tool to achieve their goal. And a lot of people miss this. A lot of people go, Docker containers. But in a lot of ways, Docker is actually a container management experience that is focused on providing just an awesome experience for packaging and distributing applications.
So instead of doing like traditional application packaging, you create your do everything inside a container and ship the container as your product?
Yep.
So people just,
absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So the interesting thing is that we even missed this on the development team here at Microsoft. So we were working on containers, and we kind of got to the stage where we're like, you know what, it's time for us to do the gentlemanly, honorable thing, and we should set up a meeting with the guys at Docker to just let them know that, hey, we're building Windows containers. And so we set up this meeting, and we went and met with them, and we were completely surprised when we said, hey, we're building Windows containers, and their immediate reaction was, that's fantastic, we want to do everything we can to support you guys. And we were like, what?
Huh?
And they actually stepped us through that, like Linux containers are just the tool that we use to do what we do on Linux, and we want to do the same thing on Windows. And we kind of had a light bulb moment, and that's when we started working very closely with them to be like, okay, fine, like let's do everything we can to get Docker to work with Windows containers as well. And one of the big things that I've been highlighting is when we talk about supporting Docker with Windows containers, we're not talking about Docker compatibility. We're actually actively contributing to the Docker project right now. And when you run it on Windows, you're going to be running exactly the same code, exactly the same binaries that you run with Docker on Linux. It's going to have 100% command and API compatibility. So the two really fun things that this means for us, the first thing, which I've been quietly pointing out to people, which is kind of odd, is if you go to Microsoft's GitHub account, you can actually pull down and build Docker for Windows containers right now, even though we haven't given out a build of Windows that has container support in it. So
nice.
If you're interested in seeing what the underlying API looks like, it's all up there. But the second thing that is actually really nice, and this is the one that really excites me, is right now there's a whole lot of activity going on around managing and building cool solutions on top of Docker. So you've got Kubernetes, who's built a management layer on top of Docker. You've got Docker Swarm coming out. You've got the OpenStack guys are building projects on top of Docker. And anyone who's building on top of solutions on top of Docker today on Linux, all that is just going to work with zero rewrite on Docker managing Windows containers. And that's really exciting.
Wait a second. Okay, so I get that there's going to be a docker.exe that will allow you to work with containers that are running Docker containers with Linux. But now you're saying you can run Windows containers through this as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I did not realize that.
Yeah, so basically I can, and this is what we demonstrated at Ignite, is you can go to a Windows box and do, Docker run PowerShell in a Windows container, and you're using the Docker commands, the Docker APIs, only you're getting a Windows container.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and that's where, as I said, all the development and activity that's going along on Docker on Linux today, when we release Windows containers, that's all just going to work with Docker on Windows containers.
Okay, but before the purposes of this podcast, you mentioned there's going to be multiple interfaces, and so there's going to be a PowerShell interface. Yep. So you'll be able to do anything, whether you use the Docker command line and its API or PowerShell, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been working actively on the PowerShell interfaces. The thing that's going to be really fun, and this is just great when you play with it, is so you're basically going to be able to write a single PowerShell script that does new container to create a container, start container, enter container, and then the same script will run commands in the container and then exit. And so you're going to be able to very easily write single scripts that manage systems with multiple identities and IP addresses and different distributed models and so on. It's going to be hugely flexible.
Okay, awesome. So I'll pivot to this question in the chat room real quick. How can containers communicate with each other on the same host?
So yeah, I saw that question asked. The answer right now is over the network. They're fully isolated from each other, so they have to communicate with each other as though they were different systems.
Would each of them have a firewall?
Each of them has their own firewall. Each of them has their own IP address. So they are fully isolated from each other.
So is there like a virtual switch infrastructure in the container management layer, or how does that work?
Actually, the answer is there is literally a virtual switch. They use the same virtual switch as Hyper-V.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
You wouldn't want to rewrite all that.
And that's been one of the great things about working on containers is there's been a lot of technology like that where we've just gone, you know what? We've already solved that problem.
So migrating containers between hosts and all that stuff is probably leveraging all the Hyper-V that's already there, right?
We're reusing as much technology as we can.
So, okay.
And as a side note, on the reusing as much technology as we can, we've actually been having a lot of fun because as much as possible, we're making the technology flow in both directions. So did you catch the PowerShell Direct feature that we announced at Ignite this year?
Not me. Jonathan?
No, I don't know what that is.
See, you guys, you missed out on the most exciting thing. So I apologize.
I'm putting links in the chat. In the chat room, they'll be in the show notes.
I'm going to blow your mind with this. So we announced and demoed, and this is in the Windows 10 Insider builds right now. If you get the current Insider build is build 10.130. So if you install build 10.130,
unless you run Enterprise.
What?
I'm still waiting for the ISOs for Enterprise for build 130.
So if you're running build 130 and you put build 130 inside a VM, so you're running 130 on 130, you can actually run PowerShell commands in the virtual machine straight from the host with no networking.
Oh, wow.
So it's a feature that we call PowerShell Direct. And basically what you do is you open up a PowerShell prompt in the host and you can say enter PS session -VM name and the name of your VM, and then like magic we go into the VM and you can run commands. We've also done the same for invoke command. So you can just from the host be invoke command -VM name, my VM, and away it goes.
I think my favorite part about that is that you are transparently reusing existing commandlets.
So, and the really fun thing about this is all technology that we actually developed for containers. And while we were building it for containers, we were like, hey, do you know it would be great if we did this on virtual machines too?
Nice. That is nice.
So yeah, that is a really cool feature. PowerShell Direct, definitely something to play with.
So Stephen in the chat room, he wants Hyper-V backup commandlets.
Yes. Actually, let me just a second. I have to bring up.
What did you say in Twitter, Stephen? WB admin needs to go.
I was just about to say, Stephen, are you Fox Deploy by any chance?
Yes, he is.
Same guy.
I have seen you on Twitter. I know what you're up to. So Stephen's been running a campaign on Twitter asking for PowerShell for backup so he doesn't have to use WB admin. It's actually something we'd love to do. It's something I have on our feature backlog. I do not know if and when we will get to it. One thing I will say is we actually have done work in the Server 2016 release where you can now actually do full backup of a virtual machine just using our WMI APIs. So Stephen, if you want to shoot me an email, ben.armstrong@microsoft.com. I'll give you a pointer to the WMI APIs, and you can roll your own PowerShell in the meantime. It's not that hard, and it might be something that I blog about. But yeah, it is something we'd love to do. Not officially part of the plan right now.
We have a question in the chat room about managing containers with group policy. Are containers, do they like join the network? Are they part of a domain, or how does that work?
So once again, full transparency, we're currently working on getting the first beta out. We haven't figured out how to make these things work with Active Directory yet.
Okay.
We're working closely with the Active Directory team, but I'm sure you guys can imagine when you can create an entire new instance of Windows in a couple of seconds and throw it away 30 seconds later. That brings up some interesting challenges for the Active Directory world as we think about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's the right tool for that job.
Yeah, so we've been talking with them. We definitely want to make sure we have a good enterprise authorization and authentication story. We're trying to figure out what the best way to approach that is. And yes, that is my answer. That's going to be my answer on a lot of these right now.
Nice.
Yeah, that makes security a big problem.
Yeah, so right now our number one goal is to get the container technology out there so that people can start playing with it. Our expectation is that between the first public preview of containers and when we RTM Server 2016, we're going to be making a lot of changes and addressing a lot of these issues. But as I said, our number one goal right now is getting something that people can play with, because there's a lot of questions about containers.
Yes, there are. I keep thinking
So
of more
going
of
back
them.
to the Docker theme, Open Container Project. You want to tell us what that's about?
So this is a very new thing, something that we're really excited to be part of. One of the things that we're definitely seeing as just an industry trend, and one of the things that containers are definitely part of, is people really want to make sure that they're not getting locked into platforms, clouds, technologies. People want to make sure that whatever path they go down, if the world changes and they want to adopt another technology, they're in a good place. And the Open Container Foundation is an effort to start providing that flexibility so that right now we're getting a lot of that through Docker, but there's lots of other interesting container management platforms out there, and we want to make sure that everyone gets to play.
Fair enough. I have one more question, maybe two more questions. So with Docker, you have the concept of defining the container and its inputs and its outputs. So the ports, the network specifics, the file system, inputs, outputs. You do this in something they call a Docker file. It's a very simple format, and you can put some deployment stuff in there too. What is this going to feel like for Windows containers or Microsoft containers?
It's the same and very strange. What do we call them? We call them Windows containers.
Okay, thank you.
So the same and yet very different and strange. So on one hand, it's the same. We use when you're using Docker, and keep in mind we have the PowerShell experience, we have the Docker experience. When you're using Docker, you can have a Docker file and you can do the same thing. At the same time, because I've made a number of these now, when you have Docker files which have chunks of PowerShell in them and are calling MSI exec and doing different stuff, it looks rather different. So, but it is the same. It's the same approach. It's just like you end up with this strange file that has a lot of like Windows-isms in it because hey, that's what you're running in the container. So I mentioned I have my Minecraft server running in a container. I actually built that using Docker. I already have a Docker file that installs Java and downloads the latest Minecraft server and gets everything all set up. And I've been playing with that a lot, so it's going to be really interesting.
Okay, last call for questions. Jonathan, do you want to hit any others?
Yeah, this is a question I'm interested in too. Is DSC support for containers planned? Like, could you apply a DSC configuration to a container?
It is not just planned; it is there. That all works, which is really neat. So you can use DSC inside containers. You can target it at containers. You can basically do everything that you want to with DSC and containers.
That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it really is. It's yeah. It allows a lot of really interesting scenarios.
All right, last question for you, Ben Armstrong. So, if I already messed this up, Jonathan. Good Lord, because I wanted to say superhero, but we've already done that, and I know that. So, what was your first personal computer, Ben?
What was my first personal computer? That is easy. It was Commodore 64.
Join the club.
Me too.
Best computer in the world. I actually
I know.
I recently, so I have an 11-year-old daughter. Recently did a daddy-daughter date, and she chose to go to like this place where you paint pottery.
Oh yes, I've done that daddy-daughter date myself.
Yeah, so what I did was I found a little coffee mug, and I made myself a Commodore 64 cup. I painted it the right blue, and I put the Commodore 64 logo on the inside. So I still have a soft spot in my heart for that system.
Yeah, those were fun.
Did you have the 1541 disk drive?
I actually had two 1541 disk drives, and now for the real nerd quote, I also used to notch my own floppies.
Oh yeah,
I remember doing that.
Which is not as lewd as it sounds.
Lay the other floppy on top and cut it out with the scissors, or did you use the hole punch?
I was a scissors person.
Me too. The hole punch, man, didn't work as well.
I used a hole punch. I don't think I had any problems with hole punches. Could be just you guys.
You're outnumbered here.
So what was the what game do you remember playing the most? What's the first one that comes to mind on the Commodore?
Jumpman,
that was a good one.
For me, it's summer games because I destroyed so many joysticks playing the summer games.
Yes, the running in summer games. Jumpman was one that I spent ages on. I actually, believe it or not, I actually still have a functioning Commodore 64 in my garage.
Wow.
Do
you have a TV that you can hook it to?
Yes, I do.
Wow.
My wife does not understand why I have a small collection of CRT TVs stored in the garage. And I have to explain to her that I have some computers that you really need the old CRT for.
Hey, guess what? There's such a thing as an HDMI RF modulator.
Yeah, but it's not the same.
I just Googled it.
It's not the same.
Is it?
I actually have a composite to VGA adapter, and it's just you got to have the original CRT screens. They're the best.
All right, good stuff. Well, thanks a lot, Ben, for spending time with us and catching us up on containers. This has been a really good show. Thank you.
Always good, and I am really looking forward to actually getting this technology out there so that everyone can play with it and start figuring out what they actually want to do with it.
What's a good place for people to go to stay on top of that, to know
good question.
what the latest and greatest is with containers on Windows?
So there are two places I would recommend. The first one is actually the virtualization team blog. That's just blogs.technet.com/b/virtualization. We're going to, whenever we have anything new come out, we're going to be updating there. The other one is we actually already have a site stood up for containers. It doesn't have much up there at the moment, but we're going to be updating it as it comes out. Let me just pull up that URL. And of course, my browser is handy and autocompletes to the internal URL. That's not helpful at this moment. Because I believe I know
we will have in the show notes for episode 304 links that are mentioned in the show. I've got your virtualization team blog one up here.
So,
lots of good stuff on Channel 9, I'm sure, too.
The official site is msdn.microsoft.com/virtualization/Windows containers. If you go there, you'll actually see we already have all the links up for the various presentations we've done at Build and Ignite. We have some intro information, and we're going to be putting up more information as it comes out there.
Outstanding.
I'm going to be. Someone's already thrown it in the chat window. How you?
I was fast this time. Doesn't always work out that way.
Yes, so that's a great site to keep an eye on. As we announce anything, we'll be putting it out there.
It's harder to track Microsoft these days. You know, when you have things coming out all the time, as opposed to the one release every 3 years kind of feel. So
it's very strange to be in the situation where people complain that we're releasing too much. As someone who's been at Microsoft for 12 years.
You don't have to implement it right away. It'll be there when you're ready for it.
Okay. You got me. Good one, Ben. All right. Thanks a lot. And I know you got to get back to your family. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, always fun to chat.
All right. Thanks a lot, everybody in the chat room. And Ben, we'll let you know when it posts so you can share it with your crew.
That was so awesome, man. I have goosebumps. Such cool technology. Yes, I do.
No, it really is. I mean, I've been playing with Docker for a long time, and I'm really still excited about it. And now it's just more of the same, except it's Windows. So and there's PowerShell. So that's something I never had with playing with Docker. I never had PowerShell. So.
By the way, I know you've said goodbye, but let me just throw out one last teaser, because this is actually what I'm super excited about. We're kind of being quiet about this, but we did mention this in the build session, and I have been given PR clearance to talk about it. We have announced that in Windows Server 2016, we are going to be supporting nested virtualization. So you're going to be able to run Hyper-V inside of Hyper-V.
Wow.
That's what I'm really excited about.
Okay, so that now we're really in Inception territory.
Yeah. No, I've already ordered a laptop with 32 gig of RAM.
So yeah, you'll have your host. Well, what would you run on as the host OS? I guess the full server 2016.
Right, you can run full Windows Server 2016, but then you can run any version of Hyper-V inside it.
Nice.
So that's going to be
really handy. Yeah.
It also further complicates our conundrum about the words guest and host.
Host, parent, host, grandparent, great-grandparent, great-great-great-parent. It's not hard.
Yes, we're going to have to come up with some new language here.
Ancestor, predecessor.
Which one's the actual hardware?
Exactly.
I've lost track of where the actual hardware is.
It's turtles all the way down, guys.
I've had a problem with my fourth uncle 7 times removed.
Just use restart container. You'll be good to go.
Exactly.
That was remarkably quick. Thank you. So, Stephen, for people listening later, we will put the link. We'll put this image in the
that is
show
great.
notes. Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen.
All right. I think we better call it, guys.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Now I should really say goodbye.
Yeah. On that note.
Nicely done.
Nice talking to you, Ben.
Okay, I'll see you around.